Strickland Foundation and Casino Maltese members, distinguished guests, good morning and welcome. In the name of my fellow colleagues on the board of the Strickland Foundation, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the revival of the Mabel Strickland Foundation Lecture Series after the COVID-induced break with the tradition. So welcome back. The Strickland Foundation aims to preserve the values of free press, freedom of thought and expression, which Mabel Strickland dedicated her energy to in the setting up of the Times of Malta, which we continue to honor to this day. This morning, we welcome our esteemed speaker, Dr. Roberta Metsola, President of the European Parliament, to address us on the topic of Malta in a changing European landscape. Her rise among the ranks of the European Parliament is a matter of pride, not only for Roberta Metsola herself, but also for the country who shares in her success. Before inviting Dr. Metsola to address us, I would like to welcome Professor Keith Shiberas, Vice President of the Casino Maltese, to say a few words.
Good morning. Your Excellency, President of Malta, Dr. George Vella, Madam President of the European Parliament, Dr. Roberta Metsola, Dr. Lawrence Gonzi, former Prime Minister of Malta, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and members of the Diplomatic Corps, Judge Giovanni Bonello, and members of the Strickland Foundation, members of the Casino Maltese, dear friends. It is with pleasure that I welcome you here on behalf of the members of the Casino Maltese. Well, you've realized that it's not my role to speak about today's event, as the Casino Maltese is hosting the Strickland Foundation, whose initiative this is. I will therefore leave that to Judge Giovanni Bonello in his role of chairman of the foundation. Instead, I am here to welcome you to our club and to its magnificent premises. Well, the club was founded in 1852, and it played a part in the difficult years leading up to Malta's self-determination. Today's lecture will focus both on Malta's recent history and on its European future. Our club fits or is part of the long timeline of events that followed its founding in the mid-19th century, exactly in 1852. This building merged with that of our club at the beginning of the 20th century. But this building has an important history of its own. It knows its origins to the early 1570s in the form of a building that we believe was probably designed by the Maltese architect Gerolamo Cassar, and we can still see traces downstairs of that. That building came to house the Knights' Casa del Tesoro. And it is from these offices, from these rooms, that the Knights administered their many commanderies and properties spread across Europe. So in many ways, this made it one of the most pan-European administrative offices of that time. And we're quite proud of this. It later became civil government's treasury in the early British period. Then it became the Casino Maltese's premises for some 7 years after the club was established in 1852. But that was only for a very short period. The Casino Maltese returned over here in the early 20th century, in the very early years, as a result bearing witness with its members being active players to important events in Malta's constitutional history. For example, I'm going to be very, very brief. On the day of the state opening of the first Maltese Parliament, on the 1st of November 1921, the head of the ministry, Joseph Howard, the new Maltese parliamentarians, many of them members of the club, the then Prince of Wales, the governor, and other dignitaries were hosted for lunch here at the Casino Maltese, just after the state opening of the new parliament by the Prince of Wales on behalf of his father. Following lunch, the club's president, Mr. Justice Arturo Mercia, joined this large contingent for a group photo that captured one of the most special moments in Maltese political history, especially in its path to self-government. Now, typical for the period, this now iconic photograph is made up only of men. It is therefore with special warmth that we welcome here Her Excellency, Dr. Roberta Metsola, the first Maltese to hold one of the great European offices, that of President of the European Parliament. Welcome.
I'd like to invite Judge Bonello to say a few words. Judge Bonello is both President of the Strickland Foundation and Honorary President of the Casino Maltese.
Your Excellency, President of Malta, Dr. George Vella, Madam President of the European Parliament, Dr. Roberta Metsola, Dr. Lawrence Gonzi, former Prime Minister of Malta, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and members of the diplomatic corps, Professor Kici Perras, members of the Strickland Foundation, and members of the Casino Maltese. Welcome. I stand before you wearing two hats. I'm wearing the hat of Chairman of the Strickland Foundation and also the hat of the Honorary President of the Casino Maltese. I wish I was wearing more hats to say chapeau with 10 different hats to Roberta. The Strickland Foundation has basically one main function. It is to promote the concepts of real democracy, particularly through a free press. That is what the Strickland Foundation aims at. And today is one manifestation of this intrinsic yearning of the foundress, Mabel Strickland. Mabel Strickland had in mind to perpetuate, as far as she could, the ideals of political democracy and of freedom of the press. I believe that Malta presently needs someone to make it proud. That someone is Roberta Metsola. Roberta managed to make us proud and humble at the same time. I'm sure you didn't come here to hear me. You didn't book 3 weeks in advance to hear my babble. We are hanging from your lips, Roberta. Thank you.
And finally, before passing the floor to President, Madam President, I would just like to draw your attention to a couple of details. That following the talk, there will be 20 minutes for questions. There will be 2 roving mics. If you do ask a question, please introduce yourselves before. After the event, we are hosting you to Vanderneer, just outside on the landing here. This is with the kind sponsorship of Corinthia Caterers and Rousey Wines, so thank you very much for that. And finally, please make sure all your phones are silent. It is my pleasure to invite our president of the European Parliament.
Good morning. You haven't heard what I'm going to say yet, so good morning to you all. President George Vella, Chairman of the Strickland Foundation, Judge Bonello, Dr. Gonzi, distinguished guests, Professor Keith Shibaras, ladies and gentlemen, very nice welcome from you to me here. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver the Mabel Strickland Memorial Lecture today. Thank you to the Foundation and to the Casino Maltese for organizing this event. It is a true honor and a privilege. I am proud to be here as the first Maltese President of the European Parliament. And as a Maltese woman, I know how great a debt of gratitude I owe to all those women who came before me, who made the path easier for my generation. Women like Mabel Strickland, who paved the way in politics and who fought passionately for a free and independent press, who managed, who thrived in a world dominated by men, who changed things in so many big and small ways. Things have come a long way, but we have still way to go before we talk about real equality of opportunity, before we can really talk about level playing fields. I also want to remember at the very beginning another formidable woman today, Daphne Caruana Galizia. I'd like to think she would have been here today. She should have been here today. The quest for justice is one that must unite and not divide us. It is not about partisanship. It is about the country and the union that we want to see. Justice cannot be about blue or red. It is about all of us. No one should have endured what happened to Daphne, what happened to her, because she was a journalist and because she was a Maltese woman. She had the courage of 10 people, but she should not have needed it. There are gaping differences in how women and men are treated in journalism, in politics, in every sphere I can think of. Mabel Strickland faced it in her field. A generation later, Daphne faced it, with a new digital element adding to the constant pressure. Every woman I know has faced it in their career. And now it is on to us to ensure that no girl growing up today in Malta, Gozo, or anywhere faces the same struggles. Progress has been too slow, too painful, and there have been too many excuses. We smash one ceiling only to find another, harder one, put in its place. But one day, all those cracks will be enough. We will get there, but we need to be ready to challenge existing systems, beat back outdated, ineffective approaches that are deeply ingrained in our societies, and understand that we are all better off when we all have the same access to opportunities. That is true for Malta and for many other places in the European Union and around the world. Gender inequality simply does not make social, political, or economic sense. I think the departing point has to be that we cannot be afraid of change. I want Europe and Malta to lead that process of renewal. Nostalgia has no place in politics. We must be future-driven, and we need to have the foresight to understand the challenges of tomorrow, and that those challenges are only able to be properly addressed if tough decisions are taken today. Europe is facing challenges on multiple fronts that require tough decisions, a reality of polycrises, as someone described it in perfect Eurospeak. We are facing a war on our continent, an illegal, unjustified, brutal invasion of sovereign, independent Ukraine by Russia. Energy prices and inflation increasing. People are finding it harder to stretch salaries to the end of the month. Migration challenges that are yet to be properly addressed. Raw materials that are becoming scarcer and damaging global supply chains. A climate catastrophe that cannot be ignored. Corruption that has damaged public trust. Rule of law that threaten people's rights with their challenges. And a post-pandemic economic recovery that remains very fragile. Malta is not immune to any of this. All these issues must be tackled together, coherently, and without neglecting one to face another. These are as much Malta's challenges as they are for the rest of the Union. And it is on Malta to lead as much as it is for any other member state. We can use our experience to look for solutions. We should not ever wait on the sidelines and hope that we are not called upon. In fact, we have been called upon already. The picture is difficult, but at the same time, it's not bleak. My point is always that the answers to the questions that our citizens ask are found in the values that Europe holds dear. The building blocks upon which everything else is founded. We cannot ignore them because they do not fit the narrative of the day or because it would simply be easier without them. That is what drives our response to the invasion of Ukraine. It is not about charity. It is about responding to an existential threat. It is about standing up for the Europe of hope, freedom, and justice. If we do not stand up when it is hardest to do so, then everything we have fought for, everything we have promised, and everything we have inherited will start to crumble. It's not easy. Diversifying our energy supplies, implementing sanctions, boosting investment in defense and security are not easy choices to make, but they are the only choice we have left. The world changed on February 24th last year, and we must change with it. Europe will always stand for peace, real peace with accountability and justice. And for there to be peace, there must be a Ukraine, a free Ukraine. For there to be a European Union, there must be a Ukraine. I called it a choice earlier, but in reality, it's not. It is a duty, it is a responsibility, and one that I am proud that Europe has managed to face together. One that Malta must continue to shoulder too, and one that we must continue to face together for as long as it may take. Aggression and imperialism have no place in the 2023 world. The cycle of history must be broken. Our Eastern and Central European member states know this perhaps better than anyone. The Second World War may have ended in 1945, but for millions, it took more than another half century for them to become masters of their own destiny. And they know what is at stake, and so should we all. I'm well aware that there are those who question the involvement of the European Union, those who would prefer to pretend that what is happening is not real, or who seek to excuse war crimes and breaches of international law, those who prefer the simplicity of propaganda to the stark reality of war, those who think they are too far away to care. And to those, I say that the European Union has prevented conflict within its borders by promoting, not subjugating, the interests of its citizens, by protecting democracy, by protecting the rule of law, the respect for human dignity in all its member states, because the price of liberty is not too high. In my first speech as President of the European Parliament, I quoted Churchill to say that there is no remaining neutral between the fire and the fire brigade. I did not know, could not have known how much of a guide those words would prove just a few weeks later. When we look at the European Union, at least my first answer is that the European Union stands for something. We are proud of that. It's not a faraway entity, it is all of us. The European Parliament belongs to the Maltese as much as it belongs to anybody else. It's not some mysterious foreign body far away. No decisions are taken without us. In fact, some are taken because of us. Now, that is not to say that our union is perfect. It is not. I share many of the frustrations with our processes, but I am determined, not alone, to fix them. I've made my mandate in this legislature about so-called bursting through the Brussels bubble and talking to people in towns, villages, islands in our union, and listening and in taking back how we can better work to make a difference in people's lives. That was the Europe that was promised to us 20 years ago. That is the Europe that we must promise now to all those countries waiting to join, as we were. That feeling when Malta joined the European Union is a moment that will remain with me, so many of us, forever. I was standing in Valletta with what felt like the entire country, staring across the sea in our grand harbor as we counted down the seconds to midnight. I will never forget that huge crowd awash with the understanding of unbridled possibility, hope, and belief in the future. I know many of you were also there, sharing my sense of homecoming, of victory in the potential of our people, ultimately of relief. But that was a whole generation ago. So many young Maltese I meet know no life without Europe. They do not remember the struggle, the existential question that it became for my generation, that risk taking Europe for granted. We cannot allow that to happen. We need to recapture that sense of hope, of optimism, of understanding. We need to keep listening and keep explaining. That is how we can rebuild the center of our political landscape and avoid a retreat to the comfort of the fringes and the easy answers to difficult questions peddled by populists. That is how we ensure that our liberal democracies can answer people's concerns, by showing tangibly the value of democracy, of liberty, of Europe every day. And we need to do that better. That sometimes lonely light that Europe shines is what drives nations to want to join our union. Not so long ago, Brexit was meant to trigger a hemorrhage of countries wanting to go it alone. The exact opposite has happened. When countries in the Western Balkans and Moldova, Ukraine look to us, we cannot slam the door. Doing that will only serve to drive people away into the hands of autocrats. On that, I'm convinced we just should not be afraid, and what is easy should never be a criterion for action. I mentioned European values a lot, and I try to put this in every speech, no matter who I talk to and where I am, because these are not just buzzwords or lofty concepts scribbled in forgotten books in old, dusty libraries. They are our raison d'être, the very motive behind why in 1951, 6 countries pooled their coal and their steel to make war not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible. An unbreakable creed that has ensured a life of freedom, of democracy, of prosperity for generations and generations of Europeans. That is what is at stake now. Europe needs to evolve, and with it, so does Malta. The way we did things in 2004 simply will not work in 2024. One of the most striking things is that it takes years for countries to join the European Union with strict standards, laws, and budgets that must be adhered to. But once you join, the tools that we have to prevent democratic backsliding are clearly insufficient. And citizens look to Europe to safeguard the promise that was made to them pre-accession. And Europe must have the ability and political will to fulfill that promise. And that is why we have insisted that EU funds are conditional on rule of law safeguards. But we can do better. We must do better. It is true that Europe must be big on the big things and small on the small things, but there is nothing bigger. The crowds that we saw in Valletta this week are proof of that. People who want standards and accountability that we promised Europe would guarantee. Corruption is the antithesis of what politics should be about. Sadly, it is a crime that is as old as time. But the true measure of our robustness of systems is how we respond when it happens. Do we help justice take its course, or do we do everything we can to try to cover it up? When last December it hit like a punch in the stomach, our European institutions, to me there was only one course of action. We are on the side of justice. We knew that we had to take immediate steps or risk people losing trust in politics in Europe, in our institutions. We've seen what happens when those in a position of power try to sweep it under the carpet. That's why the European Parliament has collaborated and helped all investigations and did so in a transparent and open manner. No questions went unanswered. That's why we implemented a series of groundbreaking reforms that would at the very least, allow alarm bells to ring earlier and firewalls to be built where there were none. That is why there will be no impunity. Corruption can never pay. That is the message I want citizens to hear. That's the message I want investors to hear. Malta and the European Union have evolved together over the last 20 years. The next 2 decades must be anchored in the same philosophy. The careful balance between protecting rights, ensuring economic growth and prosperity, protecting our security and defense, safeguarding our environment and having the courage to think long-term must characterize our next steps. And here I come back to my point about Malta leading in Europe. We talk about climate, we talk about environment, we talk about economics. To me, there is little excuse as to why these islands of ours are not at the top of the debate. We should be the poster child of a nation able to harness the potential of green vehicles, for example. We should have solar panels on every rooftop. I flew down to Malta yesterday and I landed first in Frankfurt. Whole airport covered with solar panels, much less sun there than here. Generating cheap, clean, in every sense of the word, energy. Lowering bills, cleaning our air. We can do that. We have just agreed on a European level to phase out the combustion engines by 2035. It's happening. But are we ready? Have we prepared for this? Do we have the public investment to match private ambition that is so much needed? What are we doing to allay the concerns of those who worry with so much concern and real worry about the costs? The truth is that we cannot harness the potential, just to continue on this example, of solar power if our building policy remains so ad hoc. If every dwelling is forever shaded by a bigger building blocking its access to sunlight. The right to light is something that must become part of our national discourse and building policy. It is what I mean when I say that we need to have the courage to think long-term. Nothing encapsulates the short-termism of our economic policy more than how we build in Malta. The way we build, the manner in which arbitrary decisions have been taken, the perceived lack of proper process, all this means that we are in danger of killing the goose that lays the golden egg for a quick injection of cash. Maltese culture and our heritage should be better reflected in how we build, where we build, and in what we build. Trying to be something that we are not will never reflect the authenticity that makes our islands unique in Europe. I would say unique in the world. Not only are we unique, that I think we can strike that balance. And it is about building better. How often do we hear that term? Building better. We don't have to disenfranchise a generation by making it impossible for them to take one step onto the property ladder. We cannot price them out. A recent survey found that 77% of millennials and 72% of Gen Z or Gen Z would prefer to live abroad. Better employment and salaries are the top scoring factor for both generations, and that worries me. Tied to this is education. Our children are being taught to prepare for a reality that no longer exists. My parents, who are here today, had a cycle of study, work, retire. My children will need to study, work, retrain, work, train again, work somewhere different. And my fear is that if we do not instill the critical thinking that you need in this world, Malta will suffer the brain drain that we have seen in other states. Do we pay our teachers enough? Do we offer opportunities for growth? Can we do better? It is true that we must continue to modernize as a union, and as a country. And the EU's Recovery and Resilience Facility is exactly about that. One area it invests in a great deal is digitalization. And our societies and way of life have moved online. And as that has happened, so must our businesses. And we have been slower at transitioning them than we should have. Gozo. Gozo is uniquely suited for this. In the digital world, no country is an island. So what is stopping Gozo from becoming the digital hub of Europe? The answers are both regulatory and infrastructural. Our laws and the protection and support that we give to startups are insufficient. There are so many opportunities that are ours for the taking. We only need the courage to go for it. And all of these questions are as national as they are European. We are the same side of the same coin. The same is true for migration and for the movement of people. Any business owner or economist will tell you that people are needed in order for our economies to continue to grow, to fill the jobs that need to be filled, and to ensure business models continue. At the same time, people also want to keep their villages and hometowns exactly as they believe they were 50 years ago. We hear less about the benefits and beauty of diversity and more about a false nostalgia for a way of life we like to think existed once. We want all the benefits of a strong global economy without any of the costs. It's a bit of a catch-22 situation, I would say. And again, conditions of migrant workers in Malta need to be improved. Some of the stories are horrific. A workforce that is integrated deeper within our communities is a win-win situation for all of us. We must also do better when it comes to migrants crossing on boats to Europe. This is not an issue that can be tackled by one country alone, but that should be no excuse for doing nothing. When children are dying of thirst on our seas, politics should take a back seat. More than 700 children have died since 2014, and more than 17,000 people have lost their lives in the cemetery of the Mediterranean. In the European Parliament, we have agreed on a way forward on migration that is just and humane with those in need of protection, that is fair and firm with those who are not eligible, that protects our borders, and that is strong with those traffickers preying of the most vulnerable and profiting from human desperation. No member state should exonerate itself from responsibility. No safe third country should either. There are plans on the table to finally address this multifaceted, multi-layered, difficult challenge. We did that in the European Parliament, but now all the players need to step up. So as I come to the end of this lecture, I've never given one, it's my first lecture, by the way. I'm seeing a lot of teachers in front of me. Questions remain as to how Europe has helped people's lives. How has the life of a Maltese person changed since accession? When considering the changing nature of Europe and the challenges that we have faced, was all that effort to join the European Union in the end worth it? There are certainly stories of success. There are also areas of concern, but my view is still a resounding yes. We are part of the greatest union of nations that history has ever known. Our island is at the table, and we are at the head of that table. And I think we should be proud of it. Malta has flourished. 2 more minutes. I said I'll come to the end. I still have a couple of paragraphs. Malta has flourished since 2004. Our businesses have excelled. Our journalists' work is recognized all over Europe and the world in so many aspects. We are no longer receiving direction, but in fact, we are setting it. And we did all this and more because we Maltese are a people who understand that it is the size of ideas and the depth of integrity that will always triumph over the limits of geography. In the last 20 years, we have shed that inferiority complex that has held back so many of us. I learned that working for Richard Kakia Caruana in a previous life at our permanent representation to the European Union. That is where I learned that we can lead, that we should lead, and that if we fail to stand up, then that void will be filled by someone else who may have a very different outlook. And I learned that excellence is the only acceptable standard. Mabel Strickland knew that too. She proved that time and again. That is what I want for our Europe, what I want for our beautiful Malta. It is the piece of my country that I can take with me everywhere. It is the sense that if you want something to change, it is your responsibility to make that change happen. And my hope is for people to believe, as we did in 2004, as we did in 2008 when we adopted the euro, because we knew then, as we know now, that the future is a Europe and a Malta that only we can create together. Thank you. Thank you.
Lecture so full of hope,
Thank you.
so forward-looking, and something that fills the Maltese spirit with this urge to be part of that future, of that wonderful union we fought so much to be part of. And what you said about the new generation, that's where our energy has to be. That's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to invite the audience present to ask any questions. We have this unique opportunity. There are roving mics. Please, can you take the mic? Is this the only one? Please introduce yourself first. Yes, 1, 2. We have 20 minutes, so please keep your questions very brief.
I'll be shorter in my answers.
And you'll be even shorter. So first one there. First one there. First one is there.
Thank you. Alex Jacobson, I'm a European Studies student at the University of Malta in my final year now. Like you rightfully said, 72% of my generation is looking beyond Malta now and thinking of leaving the island because of employment and salaries. What message do you have for my generation that wants to live in Malta but feels like it can't if it wants to move forward?
We can collect some questions, I think.
Yes, let's do that. Get from the wheelchair and
Father George, war is an obscenity, but also poverty is an obscenity. Is Europe spending on the elimination of poverty as much as it is spending on the war in Ukraine? What can Europe and Malta do more? Not to lessen poverty, but to eliminate poverty. Thank you.
Ariadne Massa, former journalist and media strategist. You raised a lot of very crucial issues. In fact, it's really hard to pick on one subject because you raised so many important issues that are so important to our values, country. My question to you was on democracy. And a lot of people here in Malta are looking at you to return a balance, a democratic balance to our island. I'm not going to ask you what your plans are because that wouldn't be fair. But I would like to ask you how you feel about this and how you view talk of looking at you to come and return this democratic balance.
Thank you for an excellent speech. It was a lecture, fantastic, and I think Mabel would be looking down on you saying, well done. So, thank you for that. I am Mrs. Strickland, the wife of Mabel Strickland Memorial, and I've just got two short questions for you, and I trust you and your host will not censor me as I ask them. I've got them actually here to give to your colleague. Very quickly, the Strickland Foundation was set up by Mabel Strickland for herself and her heirs in perpetuity. Yet since her death in 1988, there's been no Strickland on the Strickland Foundation. Instead, as publicly noted, Mabel's executors shooed in. I would ask you, would you champion all Maltese foundations to publish their accounts annually? Under current Maltese law, despite charitable status, yes, but this is about accountability. No, it is accountability. No. And I also want you to ask if all foundations will publish their accounts. Will you look into this, please? And the other question is on the paper. So I'm asking you to get foundations to be accountable. Yes? Okay. Will you look into it? Okay? And then the next question is there.
Okay, my name is Margalia.
Hi, Mark.
Okay, my name is Margalia. I'm an administrator. Yeah, my question that I would like to ask is, how do you see the future of migration developing? Okay.
Godfrey Leone Galano. Well done, and I admire you for your struggle for getting Ukraine into our family of nations. Ukraine are fighting our war, and we don't realize enough this. And I applaud all you do for Ukraine to get them into membership by the end of the year. But my question now goes beyond. One thing which worries me around a lot is the credibility of our economic foundations and contributors to our GDP. We applaud ourselves on the contribution of the gaming sector to our GDP. To me, it is a very big worry. Gaming is spreading exploitation of African children, young children who are being introduced to gaming at a young age. We have to, as a Europe, make sure that gaming companies are not the destruction of future economies.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your lecture. You touched very briefly on environmental construction issues. I am Jörg Sieko on behalf of Flimkinaland and Achjar, And I have a question whether it is possible to expect any kind of support from the European Parliament or Union in order to strike away paragraph 29 in our constitution, which does not allow us to take a government to court in order to challenge for a better environment. Is any support possible from the EU? Thank you.
It's Tony Borges-Barta, former Attorney General, former judge at the European Court of Justice. Do you think that Europe must integrate more in the future? What is happening is we've opened the markets to business. We've also opened the markets to criminals. And we have a freedom of movement for criminals, but no European criminal justice system. Are you in favor of having something like the US federal justice system in Europe? And do you think that Malta should fight for it? Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Hello. Hi, we're from the organization Dance Beyond Borders. First of all, thank you so much for such an inspirational lecture. Our question is, what actions can we take with regards to dealing with the selective compassion that the local population has with regards to the refugees of Ukraine and the refugees from African countries? Thank you.
Thank you for an inspirational talk. You are quite right in saying we have a sliding democracy, and I'd like to hone in on what you've pointed out to be a rather dismal picture of what is happening in Malta and Gozo from a building construction point of view. Joanna Spiteri-Staines, people know here that I fly the flag for trying to stop this, what is happening, this over-construction. However, one of the main points is that we have a law of the jungle here in the construction industry. We do not have building legislation. We have no building legislation. What can Europe do to pressure the government, which is being led by the nose, by the developers, to enforce that we have a framework which is built upon European building codes? And that is also one of the reasons why not only are we seeing this destruction, but we are also witnessing the fatalities and the dangerous habits which we now have to live with.
Good morning, I'm Rebecca Borch. I'm a member of the Maltese Parliament, and allow me to make a small comment before. Thank you for being an inspiration to all women in politics in Malta. Thank you. And going on from that, I'm sure you know, and I can also vouch for it, that being a woman in politics is not easy. What would be your message to future generation, future women who would like to enter politics, both on a European level and the Maltese level? Thank you.
Okay, 11 questions. So, Alex, we start with you. First of all, thanks for your commitment and your activism. I remember when I met you when you were much younger, you know, you're one of those who have kept up the activism, so well done to you. First of all, when I look at those statistics, and they are concerning, how do we, let's say, buck the trend, or at least even change the perception of our young people saying, look, I have no future here? I spend a lot of my time visiting schools, because I think that the crucial age at which a young person growing up starts to think as to what that young girl or young boy should do starts to form already then, especially in a country where we now vote at the age of 16, where decisions are already taken as to who should take those decisions by persons who are younger. We will have, for the first time ever next year, for the European Parliament elections, 4 member states that will vote at 16, one of which is ours. I think that if we manage to identify new areas of economy, new possibility of young people being able to find work in the areas that they want to work in, that they have the skills to work in, and that our market adapts to them and they can adapt to the market. We're not there yet because if you look at our educational curriculum, much improvement can be done. But also if we look at the lack of investment or encouragement that young people should be given. This used to be done in the past with projects, and there are, let's say, sometimes schemes that come up which will make sure that young people can have the ability to not find, and this I will say it openly, that the only way for them is to go into the public sector, is for them to have to find niches where they work in here. And there we could look at other countries, at best practices. You could look at here, this is a discussion that we have quite often, how, for example, Sicily has developed from an investment perspective, how different islands in the Mediterranean, although we are different because we are a country island and therefore benefit differently from funding, have emerged stronger, but not by becoming what they aren't. And I think that's where the sense of I have no other choice comes from. So I would like to put that number down for a 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old who lives in Malta, to say that actually there's a lot that this country has given me, and therefore it's my time to give this country what I've learned. It's also about aspiration, and we sometimes lose that, and making people be proud of the fact that they are Maltese, they live here, and that they can do better and they can improve. Father Joe, you are very right. I spoke with the director of the World Food Programme about 2-3 weeks ago, and he told me that already people in 2023 are going to be much poorer than in 2022, but nothing compares to how poor they will be in 2024, globally. What we are facing is a food shortage catastrophe. And I come at it from there because globally poverty starts from there in terms of then moving on or triggering mass movement of people. What I think has happened, and I mentioned the comfort of political fringes. You know, as a politician, it is sometimes easy to come up with one-liners, and you know, I've run campaigns when you sit on a stage and there are candidates who run a campaign on a one-liner. We've seen that not only in Malta but in other countries. And you start to wonder, my goodness, that one line is getting through better than a well-thought-out argument of how economically you can reach your aim and your goal. Because of those one-liners, we have lost the ability to speak from the center. And that means that we have stopped to balance or put into perspective the fact that our electorate is the whole country. I think for many years, the main political parties have done that, have spoken to their electorate when it becomes comfortable, but you forget that there is an ever-emerging size of people who feel marginalized, who feel that they don't fit, who feel that they are political orphans, and therefore do not get spoken to by anyone. And that, generally speaking, not only in Malta, is broadly second generation, of societies that are below the poverty line. Is it too late? The war has meant that our usual supply chains in terms of grain, corn, we're talking about global food distribution across the world, means that we're going to have a very, very few difficult years ahead. Our policies do not factor, because we don't cost them, the social and economic impact. I mentioned the combustion engine on purpose. I met a car producer who told me there will always be people who can buy the best cars. But how are you going to make sure that those who can't afford it continue to be able to go to work? Not only in this country, but others. So we are moving ahead very quickly, investing, protecting, but day by day, the number of people who fall outside that basket of who we cater for is growing. And if we don't tackle it now, if we think about the aging population, the increased impact on our social services, on our health service, will mean that more people will fall outside. And it starts to get younger and younger. And there's also the idea, and I see this growing, I've been a member of Parliament, of the European Parliament for 10 years, and I see a big difference from 2003 to 2013, 2023. Less people talk about it. But I know that there are organizations, I see Sabine here, Kaburdan, who represents FIDEM, who works very hard in order to make sure that forgotten voices are actually represented. But we're not doing anywhere near enough. Nothing, Father, nothing. The church plays a very important role globally, but states cannot continue to rely on the church to fill the gaps. And I say this also in the migration debate. Ariadne, democracy. You know, I saw, taking this out of Malta, I saw statistics that said that around 70% of today's world is run by autocrats. So if you exclude the European Union, North and most of the Latin American countries, Australia, New Zealand, some of Asian countries, it starts to become very small. You count them on your fingertips. And this is a higher number than we've ever had in the world, that countries are not democratically run. How do we restore democratic balance? Democratic balance is restored by speaking up and not being afraid to be in a minority. Because if we only work with the majority rules at all costs, then we've lost it. And perhaps this country has become very comfortable with that. But that's my responsibility. It's my colleagues' responsibility in national parliament to be able to remain, you know, a guiding light for whoever wants to follow and choose. We have to present that choice. Because if we don't, then how can we ask people to vote for us? I don't see a difference between a member of the European Parliament and a member of the national parliament. I've said this since I was elected. I think that was also something that benefits the fact, I mean, is a result of our electoral system. I pride myself and my colleagues in the European Parliament, because of our electoral system, that we are directly chosen, selected by name, in order. And you don't vote for a political party and then the list is determined internally. Because that means that when you're in the European Parliament, you work every day to be accountable for every vote that has been given to you. So it's not a question of returning or not. I'm here, and I'm here to stay. I can say that. I received a letter from Mr. Strickland already 2 weeks ago, and I have been in contact with him. The question that you have sent to me, I will look at it and I will answer it. Mark, future of migrants, future of migration. Here I touched upon the challenge that we've been facing, and this is from before EU membership, of, you know, ever-present moving global south. And I will link this with the last question that I received. Question 9 on selective compassion. In terms of, we have, I think, always, we go through phases, Mark. We either don't speak about migration or we speak about it all the time. We speak about it when, unfortunately, we see tragedies. We see other countries bickering. We feel alone in handling a very difficult situation. But we never make the step over understanding that our economy relies on third country nationals. We found that out immediately during the pandemic and just when our market started to reopen, because we simply shut the door. Sometimes we used to talk a lot, you know, about what your political ideology is, and you know, I'm a Christian Democrat, and I'm proud to say I'm a Christian Democrat. Sometimes people say, what do you mean by a Christian Democrat? You know, young people say, why would you label? I said, well, that means that, you know, if you put the individual at the center of every decision you take, that you don't see gender, you don't see age, you don't see nationality, you don't see color. And I think that we have conveniently lost that along the way for the short-term gain of a quick electoral bump. So it will be hard, it will not be solved easily, but I think that if we go by the fact that we have international obligations, we allow ourselves to negotiate and talk about real solidarity, we protect external borders, but we don't look away. And that is where I think we need to do much more. Godfrey, thanks for your comments on gaming. I would rather talk about exploitation in general, if I can do that. I think that sometimes our due diligence of companies or organizations that are established all over the European Union, we only focus on their bottom line and their economic impact rather than what could be the let's say, the consequence, or whether direct or indirect. I would always, let's say, be concerned, and I think that there is a huge emerging problem with the way we dialogue with third countries. At the moment, we're discussing Latin America a lot because of an incoming Spanish presidency. But we did discuss with the African Union for many months last year. I would turn it around and I would say, in fact, it is European companies, technological tech companies, that are investing in African countries that are creating huge employment there. And I think that we as Malta should tap into that. And rather than look at potential indirect consequences of economic enterprise, we could be the vehicle of investing digitally. France is miles ahead. Italy is miles ahead. We could do the same. Everything is done digitally, and we could very much be as strategic and capable as we were 20 years ago in identifying the niche that continues to grow, and we can only thank the government at the time for that. Jorgon, flimkien għall-ambjent aħjar. European Parliament will not discuss individual articles of a national constitution. But what it will do, and this is what has happened in authorizing and ex post analyzing the the expenditure of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is an unprecedented amount of capital injection in the European Union, including in Malta, in order to help with the post-pandemic recovery. And that money cannot be used for anything. It should be used for the green and digital transition. And what I would advise is that more scrutiny is placed on where that money is spent here and how it is really being spent on the green and digital transition. Because that's where I will link to Joanna Spiteri-Stains's question. The projects that are being implemented by other member states are precisely for safer building, more reusable materials. I'll give you an example. In Amsterdam, I think after 2040, not one building block can be used that is not recycled. It's a rule. The European Union didn't tell the Netherlands to do that, but the Netherlands decided to be a step further. Why don't we do the same? Why are we not re-greening our empty spaces? Not so many left. What are we doing? Why are we not? Why do we need to place concrete around a tree? Why do we need to, just every little piece of weed be disappeared because it's, well, not aesthetic? I don't understand it. And I also think that when we look, I just met with Jean-Paul Sophia's mother just before this meeting. I met her in the next room. And she said, why am I only getting blank answers? Why am I am the mother of a son who died in a building accident. A building collapsed on him. 3 years ago, Miriam Perch died. What's happened since then? Where is the accountability? Where is the sense of justice so that we can believe in the institutions? I think no mother should live with a government that tells her, I will not open an inquiry. Why would she live like that? I certainly wouldn't. I don't think anybody deserves that. Not in Malta, not in anywhere. Tony, your question was the most difficult, Borj Bartea, because it's here I am. Sometimes I wonder about the criminal justice system. I agree that we should have, first of all, we've worked a lot on mutual recognition of decisions, and we've come a long way also in making sure that our legislation, for example, in the social area and in the civil liberties area, is light years ahead of other member states. So we are now actually putting the pressure on other member states to make sure that they recognize judicial decisions from our courts. I think that the European Court of Justice, or the Court of Justice of the European Union, has, let's say, in its, as we always call it, the way the judges are being pronounced, there is an ever-increasing competence that is being given to the European level, particularly civil law, less in criminal law, because that's still very largely a member state competence unless the crime is cross-border. In other words, where it involves two or more countries. But of course, more and more countries in a globalized world become involved in most transactions, even in crime. We have huge, unprecedented levels of organized crime, importation of contraband substances. You'd be surprised, this is the largest sphere of activity that, for example, Europol is working on. I have one concern, is that I mentioned Brexit, is that I hope that the United Kingdom judicial system taps into and joins up with ours. From an intelligence perspective, security, defense, it has. But if we talk about SLAP, strategic lawsuits against public participation, we talk about, frankly speaking, a huge amount of shelters that are being given to persons on the sanctions list. by a system that is no longer part of the EU. This is maybe a bit technical and from a legal point of view, one that will be much studied, but I'm a little bit concerned. Rebecca, first of all, congratulations, you're a new member of the Parliament, and a very active and effective one as well. What is my message to women to enter politics? My answer is don't be afraid. Dr. Gonzi first called me in 2004, almost 20 years ago, to run. My first answer was obviously no. Second answer also no. Third answer was speak to my parents. And then I said yes. Do not be afraid, even if you don't get elected. First time, I didn't get elected first time. I didn't get elected second time either. Narrowly. Still hurts. But if I had not been, most importantly, you know, we celebrated Women's Day last week, and every year I say, I wish we do not have to celebrate Women's Day. Every year I say. But we do it because there's still a lot to do. You know, the mountain is steep. But I think the best women can do is to pull each other up with them. Because if we don't, no one else will. Thank you. Can I go back?
Please join us for a drink outside and we can carry on the conversation in a more informal manner.